Hey everybody. So, I know I have Boston Bruins stuff on. This is just what I'm wearing today, what I've got on. I want to talk about the Dallas Stars today because I think this is a very important year for the Dallas Stars. Before we get to this, I just want to say if you're not yet a subscriber to this channel, please hit that subscribe button. As long as you follow the hockey and follow the NHL, there are videos here for you that you'll enjoy. So please hit that subscribe button and follow the channel. Now, at the beginning of last season, I wrote an article on offthewallhockey.com about how last year was a do-or-die season for the Philadelphia Flyers. Basically, I said that Philadelphia needed to make the playoffs last season or it was time for major changes in Philly. And I was talking about, breaking up that core group and really, going in a totally different direction because they had a roster that should be in the playoffs year in and year out, and missing the playoffs was unacceptable for them. Now this year, I'm looking at the Dallas Stars, and I'm thinking the exact same thing. This is a do-or-die year for the Dallas Stars. When you look at the Dallas Stars roster on paper, they should be a playoff team. And I think they expect to be a playoff team, and their fans expect them to be a playoff team. They haven't made the playoffs in a couple of years now, and it's really starting to become a problem. This past offseason, they brought in a new coach. They got rid of Ken Hitchcock, who retired, and they brought in Jim Montgomery out of the NCAA, Denver University. So they have a first-time NHL coach now. Which I think is an interesting move, and certainly a move that shows that they're willing to make changes and go in a completely different, unforeseen direction to try and get this team to the playoffs. Their core group is obviously John Klingberg on the back end, and Jamie Benn and Tyler Seguin up front. They have some other really good pieces. Alexander Radulov. They've got some young guys that are stepping up. Radek Fox is really coming into his own. It's an interesting team to look at, and on paper they should be a playoff team. However, they do play in the Central Division, and that is a very, very difficult division to play in because there are no bad teams. The Central Division is probably the only division in hockey that I look at and go, there's not a single bad team in that division. Any of those 7 teams could be playoff teams. Chicago, I think, is probably the worst team right now, but they're still not a bad team. When you look at the Pacific, you have Arizona and Vancouver, who are clearly a ways away from the playoffs. In the Metro, I think the Islanders aren't going to be very good this year, and obviously the Rangers are rebuilding. They're not, probably not playoff teams. And then in the Atlantic, you've got Ottawa and Montreal and Buffalo and Detroit. Those are all teams that I don't think are really anywhere close to the playoffs. The Central Division, you do not have that team that is way out of the playoff picture already, and really looks like they really have no shot. Because even I would say Chicago is probably the worst team in that division, and I would not say that they have no chance of making the playoffs. Jonathan Toews could have a bounce back year. Corey Crawford could stay healthy. They could snag a wild card spot. So the Central is a very, very tough division to play in, which does not bode well for Dallas. But man, when you have guys like Jamie Benn and Tyler Seguin and John Klingberg and the solid deep team that Dallas has, you have got to make the playoffs. And for them to have missed the last couple of years, it's really, really disappointing. And I think that similar to what I said about Philly at the beginning of last season, if Dallas misses the playoffs again this year, it really might be time to shake things up there and make some major franchise-changing changes. And the guy that immediately comes to mind about that is Tyler Seguin, because this is the last year of his contract. His contract is up at the end of this season, which means there's trade possibilities with Seguin. I don't think if you're Dallas, you really want to just let him walk in free agency. I think you want to get something for him. Certainly a first-line star player of his caliber, you don't just want to let walk away. You want to get something in return. So whether they trade him at the deadline, maybe if Dallas is out of it by the deadline, which I don't think they will be. But if they do have a really bad, disappointing season and are out of it by the deadline, maybe they trade him then. Maybe they trade him around draft time. That's another opportunity to possibly really shake things up. But he's got to be a guy that you think that maybe if this season really doesn't go as planned, you think about moving. I don't think they'll move Jamie Benn. But it's another thing to think about. I wouldn't think that Philadelphia would want to move Claude Giroux, but had Philly missed the playoffs again last season, that might have been on the table for a major shakeup with that team. I don't think you can really pull anything off the table if Dallas misses the playoffs again this year, because they have got to do something to get themselves back into the postseason. So I think that this is just an absolutely massive year for the Dallas Stars as a franchise, and really, really important for them to make the playoffs this season. I was saying this about Philadelphia last year, and Philly went out and made the playoffs last season. They lost to Pittsburgh in the first round, but there's no shame in that. And they should be a playoff team again this year. Dallas needs to get back to the playoffs this year. When you look at that Central Division, I mean, you've got Winnipeg, Nashville, St. Louis, Minnesota, Colorado was a playoff team last year, and Dallas and Chicago. All 7 teams have playoff potential. You got to think of Winnipeg, Nashville, and St. Louis really being your top 3 teams in that division. So then it's going to be a fight between Colorado, Minnesota, and Dallas and Chicago to get into the playoffs. And there might only be one spot for those teams, depending on if 4 or 5 teams make it to the postseason out of that division this year. So it's going to be a very, very tough year for every team in that division to get the spot that they want, because that is an extremely difficult division to be in. But I think if you're Dallas, you have to make the playoffs this year. With that roster and that core intact, I mean, you should be a playoff team. And they haven't been the last couple of years, so that's disappointing. And with the big surge that St. Louis has put on this year, or this off season, with adding all the players that they have, they're making a huge playoff push. Dallas has got to make the playoff push with the group that they have. Dallas didn't make any huge roster moves this off season. They didn't add, they've added some depth pieces and changed things around depth wise, but they didn't go out and get a marquee player the way St. Louis has brought in guys like Tyler Bozak, David Perron, traded for Ryan O'Reilly, signed Pat Maroon. Like, St. Louis made those huge changes after missing the playoffs last year. Dallas, their big change was the coach. So now we're going to see how Jim Montgomery does with this team. And, they've solidified the goaltending situation a little bit better, I think. Bringing in Anton Khudobin, who I think is going to be fantastic for Dallas after watching him the last couple of years in Boston. I love Anton Khudobin. I think he's one of the best backup goaltenders in the league, and I think he's going to be fantastic for Dallas. They've got to hope that Ben Bishop can stay healthy and play a decent number of games this year. But if he can't, I think Khudobin will do a decent job as a backup and maybe even have to play some extended time if Bishop does get hurt again. So, huge year for the Dallas Stars. If you're a Dallas Stars fan, you've got to be expecting the playoffs. I don't know how much longer you can be satisfied, or I don't think they're satisfied not making the playoffs. I think last year, I think they were disappointed last year, and I definitely think that they're going into this season with playoff expectations, and they should be. When you look at their roster, they should be a playoff team. So, much like the Flyers last year, I think this is a do-or-die season for Dallas, and if they do not make the playoffs this year, it's time for maybe some major roster changes, a major overhaul. They are breaking up the core group that they have now, and really changing things up and going in a different direction to see if you can get this team back to the postseason. So that's pretty much what I've got for Dallas. Like, comment, share, subscribe, follow on social media, check out offthewallhockey.com. All those links in the description below. Keep spreading the word about this channel. Let's keep this thing growing. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll talk to you guys soon.